The morning dew still clung to the grass when James Morgan first spotted the majestic stallion. Standing at the fence of his modest farmhouse, coffee mug in hand, he watched as Thunderbolt galloped across the pasture, his chestnut coat gleaming in the early sunlight. The horse's powerful muscles rippled beneath his skin with each stride, a testament to years of careful breeding and loving care. At 58, James had weathered more storms than most. His weathered face, etched with lines that told stories of drought, financial hardship, and personal loss, had rarely shown the smile that now touched his lips as he observed his prized horse. Thunderbolt wasn't just an animal to him. He was family, the last living connection to his late wife, Sarah. Beautiful creature, isn't he? The voice behind him belonged to his daughter, Emma, who had returned to the farm after her mother's passing 3 years ago. That he is, James nodded, not taking his eyes off the stallion. Sarah always said he had a spirit that couldn't be broken. Emma joined him at the fence, her own mug steaming in the cool morning air. Dad, we need to talk about the farm. The bank called again yesterday. James's smile faded. He'd been avoiding this conversation for weeks, but the reality was impossible to ignore. After Sarah's expensive medical treatments and years of poor harvests, the Morgan farm was drowning in debt. The bank had given him 30 days to come up with a substantial payment, or they'd foreclose. I know what they want, he said, his voice hardening. And I know what you're going to suggest. Thunderbolt could fetch a good price, Emma said carefully. Mr. Richardson from the next county has been asking about him for his racing stable. James shook his head firmly. That horse was the last gift I gave your mother. He's not for sale. Before Emma could respond, the sound of tires on gravel announced an unexpected visitor. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows rolled up the dusty driveway, looking painfully out of place among the weathered farm buildings and rusted equipment. Who on earth? James muttered, setting his mug on the fence post. The vehicle came to a stop, and the driver's door opened to reveal a man in his early 40s, dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than James earned in 3 months. His polished leather shoes seemed to hesitate before touching the dusty ground. Good morning, the stranger called, flashing a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I'm looking for James Morgan. You found him, James replied cautiously, walking toward the visitor with Emma following close behind. The man extended his hand. Blake Donovan, I'm in the area on business, and I heard about your horse. Thunderbolt, is it? I'd like to take a look at him if you don't mind. James shook the offered hand, noting the smooth skin that had clearly never seen a day of manual labor. And what business would you have with my horse, Mr. Donovan? Blake's smile widened. I collect exceptional things, Mr. Morgan. Rare art, vintage cars, and occasionally, extraordinary horses. Your Thunderbolt has quite a reputation in equestrian circles. Emma stepped forward. How did you hear about him? Word travels, Blake said smoothly. When there's an animal with bloodlines as impressive as his, people talk. I understand he's a direct descendant of Northern Storm and Midnight Duchess? James nodded reluctantly, impressed despite himself. Northern Storm had been a renowned racing champion, and Midnight Duchess had produced some of the finest show horses in the region. Those bloodlines were precisely why Sarah had wanted Thunderbolt. She'd seen the potential in him even as a foal. May I see him? Blake asked, already looking past them toward the pasture where Thunderbolt continued his morning exercise, seemingly oblivious to the discussion about his fate. James hesitated, then nodded curtly. This way. As they walked toward the pasture, Blake surveyed the farm with casual interest. Beautiful property you have here, Mr. Morgan. Been in the family long? 3 generations, James replied. My grandfather built that barn with his own hands. They reached the fence, and Blake let out a low whistle as he got his first clear view of Thunderbolt. The stallion was truly magnificent. 17 hands tall, with powerful hindquarters and a proud carriage that spoke of both strength and intelligence. As if sensing he was being observed, Thunderbolt turned toward them, ears pricked forward curiously. He's even more impressive than I was told, Blake murmured, his practiced nonchalance slipping for a moment to reveal genuine awe. James felt a surge of pride, followed immediately by defensiveness. He's not just a pretty face. Has the gentlest temperament I've ever seen in a stallion his size. Smart, too. Understands commands better than some farmhands I've hired. Call him over, Blake suggested. James hesitated, then whistled sharply. Thunderbolt's ears twitched, and without hesitation, the horse trotted toward them, stopping just at the fence. His intelligent eyes seemed to assess the stranger. "May I?" Blake asked, gesturing toward the horse. James nodded reluctantly, and Blake extended his hand palm up. Thunderbolt sniffed it curiously, then allowed the stranger to stroke his muzzle. James watched carefully. The horse had always been an excellent judge of character. After a moment of quiet assessment, Blake turned to James with newfound resolution in his eyes. "Mr. Morgan, I'll be direct. I want to buy your horse." "He's not for sale," James replied automatically. Blake smiled, clearly having anticipated this response. "Everything has a price, Mr. Morgan. I'm prepared to offer you $10,000 for him, cash today." Emma gasped softly beside him. $10,000 would cover the immediate payment needed to keep the bank at bay. James felt his resolve waver for just a second before he caught Thunderbolt's gaze. Those familiar eyes seemed to look straight through him, reminding him of Sarah and all she had loved about this farm. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Donovan, but as I said, he's not for sale." Blake's smile tightened slightly. "Mr. Morgan, I understand the sentimental value, but $10,000 is quite generous for a horse from a farm that's—" He glanced pointedly at the weathered buildings and aging equipment, clearly seen better days. James stiffened, feeling his daughter shift uncomfortably beside him. So the man had done his homework. He knew about their financial troubles. "Dad," Emma whispered, "maybe we should—" "No," James cut her off, his voice firm but quiet. He turned back to Blake. "Mr. Donovan, I don't know who told you about our situation, but Thunderbolt isn't leaving this farm. Not for $10,000, not for any amount." Blake studied him for a long moment, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. "All right, let's say $15,000. "Did you not hear what I just said?" James felt his temper rising. "This isn't a negotiation." $20,000 then, Blake countered, pen already in hand. "That's my final offer, and it's more than fair. You could save this farm with that kind of money, Mr. Morgan." A small crowd had begun to gather, a couple of farmhands who had been working nearby, and old Tom Wilson from the neighboring property who had stopped by to borrow some tools. They watched the exchange with undisguised interest. James looked at Thunderbolt, who had remained at the fence, his eyes steady and trusting. Then he looked at the check in Blake's hand. $20,000 could indeed save the farm, pay the medical bills that still haunted him, give Emma the security she deserved. The crowd waited, the morning air suddenly thick with tension. Emma stood frozen, clearly torn between practical necessity and understanding her father's attachment to the horse. The farmhands exchanged glances, knowing full well the financial strain their employer was under. Blake Donovan stood confident, checkbook open, the picture of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. He was offering a solution, a way out of James's troubles with a simple signature. James took a deep breath and looked Blake directly in the eyes. Everyone leaned in slightly, waiting for his response. The rich city man, the concerned daughter, the curious neighbors, all wondering if James Morgan would accept this lifeline. "Mr. Donovan," James finally said, his voice steady and clear enough for everyone to hear, "that horse was the last gift I gave my wife before cancer took her from us. Each morning when I see him run, it's like she's still here with me. There are some things in this world that don't have a price tag, and this is one of them. So you can put away your checkbook and get back in your fancy car. Thunderbolt stays here." The assembled crowd fell silent. Blake's confident expression faltered, clearly unaccustomed to having his money refused so decisively. He glanced around at the onlookers, perhaps realizing for the first time that this was more than a simple transaction. "I see," he said finally, closing his checkbook with a snap. "Well, if you change your mind—" "I won't," James said firmly. Blake nodded stiffly, slipping the checkbook back into his jacket pocket. "I'll leave my card, just in case." He placed a business card on the fence post and turned to go, his polished shoes now coated with a fine layer of farm dust. As the black SUV disappeared down the driveway, Emma touched her father's arm. "Dad, are you sure? That money could have—" "I'm sure," James interrupted, his eyes still on Thunderbolt. "Some things matter more than money, Emma. Your mother understood that. I hope someday you will too." The small crowd lingered, the weight of what they had just witnessed hanging in the air. Old Tom Wilson shuffled forward, clearing his throat. "James," he began hesitantly, "what you just did there, well, I reckon that took more guts than most men have." James turned, surprised by the comment and the murmurs of agreement from the others. For the first time he realized they were looking at him with something like respect, perhaps even admiration. Thunderbolt nickered softly, pushing his muzzle against James's shoulder as if offering his own approval. James stroked the horse's neck, the familiar touch grounding him in his decision. What he didn't tell the others, what he couldn't bring himself to say out loud, was that refusing Blake's offer might have just sealed his fate with the bank. Without that money, he had no clear path to keeping the farm. But as he stood there with his hand on Thunderbolt's warm neck, feeling the strong heartbeat beneath his palm, he knew he'd made the only choice he could live with. The choice Sarah would have wanted him to make. The bank's foreclosure notice arrived 3 days later, its official letterhead and cold, impersonal language making it all the more devastating. James sat at the kitchen table, reading the document for the 4th time, as if the words might somehow change. The farm would be auctioned in 21 days, unless he could produce $18,500 to cover the outstanding loan payments and penalties. "We could still call him," Emma said quietly from the doorway. She didn't need to specify who him was. Blake Donovan's business card remained on the counter where James had tossed it after their encounter, its embossed lettering catching the afternoon light. James folded the notice and slipped it back into its envelope. "No. Dad, please. It's just a horse. Mom would want us to save the farm." James stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the worn linoleum floor. "Your mother loved that horse as much as I do. She'd understand." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "But I don't. I don't understand throwing away our home, our legacy for—" "This discussion is over," James said firmly, heading for the door. "I need to check on the north field." Outside, the summer heat hit him like a physical force. James walked with purpose, not toward the north field as he'd claimed, but straight to the pasture where Thunderbolt grazed peacefully in the afternoon sun. The horse lifted his head at James's approach, nickering softly in recognition. "Hey, boy," James murmured, stroking the stallion's strong neck. "Seems we've got ourselves in quite a situation here." Thunderbolt nudged him gently, dark eyes somehow knowing. James sighed heavily, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. 21 days, 3 weeks to somehow find over $18,000, or lose everything his family had built over 3 generations. "James! James Morgan!" The shout came from the direction of the main road. James turned to see Tom Wilson waving frantically as he hurried across the field. The older man was red-faced and out of breath by the time he reached the fence. "Tom, what's got you all worked up?" "You won't believe who just stopped by my place," Tom panted, leaning against the fence post. "That fancy fella from the city, Donovan, asked all kinds of questions about you and the farm. And Thunderbolt here." James frowned. "What kind of questions?" "History of the place. Whether you've had offers before. If you had other financial options." Tom wiped his brow with a handkerchief. "I didn't like his tone, James. Seemed like he was fishing for ways to pressure you." "Did you tell him anything?" "Course not. Told him to mind his own business." "But James—" Tom hesitated, lowering his voice despite there being no one else around. Word is he's not just some horse collector. Martha down at the diner says her nephew works at the county records office, and Donovan's company has been buying up distressed properties all over the valley. They're planning some kind of resort development. James's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about Thunderbolt then. The horse was simply the first piece of a larger puzzle. Donovan wanted the land. Thanks for the warning, Tom. After Tom left, James remained with Thunderbolt, his mind racing. The development angle explained Donovan's persistence, but it didn't change James's predicament. If anything, it made his refusal even more important. He wouldn't be party to turning generations of farmland into vacation cottages for the wealthy. When James finally returned to the house, darkness had fallen. He was surprised to find the kitchen lights on and the smell of fresh coffee in the air. Even more surprising was the figure sitting at his kitchen table. "Dr. Rodriguez," James said, removing his hat as he entered. "Wasn't expecting you." Elena Rodriguez had been the local veterinarian for nearly 15 years and had treated Thunderbolt since he was a foal. She was also one of the few people Sarah had truly called a friend. "Emma called me," she explained, rising to pour him a cup of coffee. "She's worried about you, James. So am I." James accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Where is she?" "She went to stay with her friend in town. Said she needed some space." Elena studied him over the rim of her mug. "She told me about the offer for Thunderbolt and the foreclosure notice." James sighed, settling heavily into a chair. "Then I suppose you're here to tell me I'm being a stubborn old fool too?" Elena smiled gently. "Actually, I'm here because I think I might have a solution." She pulled a folded newspaper from her bag and spread it on the table between them. "The Willow Creek Charity Derby is in 3 weeks. First prize is $25,000. James stared at the advertisement, a spark of hope flickering to life before common sense extinguished it. "Elena, Thunderbolt's never raced professionally. He's not registered with any racing association. They'd never allow him to compete." "I checked the rules," Elena countered, tapping the fine print at the bottom of the page. "It's a charity event, open to all horses regardless of registration status. There's a qualifying round next week, but with Thunderbolt's lineage and your experience." She left the implication hanging. James ran a hand through his hair. "I haven't jockeyed in a race since I was in my 20s, and Thunderbolt's never run a competitive track. But you've trained him, haven't you? I've seen you two in the back pasture. He's fast, James, and he trusts you completely." Elena leaned forward, her expression earnest. "It's a long shot, I know. But it's a shot." James stared at the newspaper for a long moment. The Derby was exactly 3 days before the bank's deadline. If they won, even if by some miracle we qualified, he'd be up against professional racehorses, thoroughbreds trained from birth for speed. "Yes," Elena acknowledged. "But sometimes heart counts for more than training. And that horse has more heart than any animal I've ever treated." After Elena left, James remained at the kitchen table well into the night, the newspaper spread before him, Blake Donovan's business card sitting ominously beside it. 2 paths forward, both fraught with risk and uncertainty. The next morning, James rose before dawn and went straight to the barn. Thunderbolt greeted him with a soft whinny as James opened his stall door. "What do you say, boy?" James whispered, stroking the horse's muzzle. "One more crazy adventure together?" Thunderbolt nudged him gently, as if in agreement. James smiled for the first time in days. "All right then, let's see what you can do." For the next week, James and Thunderbolt worked from sunrise to sunset. They started with basic conditioning, long runs across the property to build stamina, followed by short sprints to develop speed. James set up makeshift obstacles to improve Thunderbolt's agility and response time. Emma returned home 3 days into their training regimen. She watched silently from the fence as her father put Thunderbolt through his paces, her expression a mixture of skepticism and reluctant hope. "Dr. Rodriguez told me about the Derby," she said when James finally stopped for a water break. "You really think he has a chance?" James wiped sweat from his brow. "Honestly, I don't know, but I'd rather try this than sell him to Donovan." "Dad," Emma hesitated. Donovan came by the diner yesterday. He's raised his offer to $30,000. James stiffened. You talked to him? He approached me, Emma clarified quickly. I didn't seek him out. But Dad, that's almost twice what we need for the bank. We could pay off the loan and still have money to repair the irrigation system. And lose Thunderbolt in the process. James shook his head firmly. We're doing this, Emma. I need to know if you're with me or not. Emma looked at him for a long moment, then at Thunderbolt, who was watching them with those intelligent eyes. Finally, she sighed. What can I do to help? James's face broke into a relieved smile. For starters, you can time our runs. I need to know exactly how fast he can take the quarter mile. As qualifying day approached, word spread throughout the community. Neighbors began to stop by, offering encouragement and sometimes practical help. Old Tom Wilson brought over racing bridles that had belonged to his father. The teenage boys from the Peterson farm volunteered to help build a proper starting gate for practice. Even Martha from the diner contributed, sending over hearty meals to keep your strength up. The morning of the qualifying race dawned clear and warm. James loaded Thunderbolt into the borrowed trailer with steady hands that belied his inner nervousness. The horse seemed to sense the importance of the day, standing calmly as James secured the trailer door. Elena arrived as they were preparing to leave, medical bag in hand. Just a quick check before the big day, she insisted, giving Thunderbolt a thorough examination. He's in excellent condition, James. You've done incredible work in such a short time. Let's just hope it's enough, James replied, checking his watch. We should get going. Don't want to be late. As they pulled onto the main road, James noticed a black SUV parked just past his property line. Though the windows were tinted, he had no doubt who was watching their departure. Blake Donovan wasn't done with them yet. Ignore him, Emma said from the passenger seat, having followed her father's gaze. Today isn't about him. It's about you and Thunderbolt showing everyone what you can do together. James nodded, focusing on the road ahead. Today was just qualifying, the first hurdle in their unlikely bid to save the farm. But as he checked the rearview mirror and saw Thunderbolt's proud head visible through the trailer window, he felt a surge of determination. Whatever happened today, he wouldn't regret his choice. Some bonds were worth fighting for, even against impossible odds. The Willow Creek Fairgrounds buzzed with activity as James pulled in with the trailer. Horse trailers of all sizes lined the participants' area, from sleek, expensive rigs emblazoned with racing stables logos to modest setups like his own borrowed trailer. Grooms in professional uniforms led gleaming thoroughbreds, while trainers consulted clipboards and checked equipment with practiced efficiency. I didn't expect so many entrants, Emma said quietly as they parked. James nodded, trying to keep his expression neutral despite the sinking feeling in his stomach. It's still just qualifying. Top 12 times make it to the Derby. As they unloaded Thunderbolt, James couldn't help but notice the sideways glances and barely concealed smirks from some of the professional outfits. Next to the sleek, finely tuned racehorses, Thunderbolt, despite his impressive build and lineage, looked like exactly what he was, a farm horse who'd never seen a professional track. Morgan? James Morgan? James turned to see a man in his 60s approaching, dressed in worn jeans and a faded plaid shirt that made him look more like a farmer than someone involved in horse racing. That's me, James confirmed, extending his hand. Ray Simmons, the man introduced himself, shaking James's hand firmly. I used to race against your father back in the day. Heard you were bringing Northern Storm's grandson to qualify. His eyes shifted to Thunderbolt, widening appreciatively. Well, I'll be. He's got the look, that's for sure. You knew my father? James asked, surprised. Ray chuckled. Everyone in regional racing knew Hank Morgan, best natural horseman I ever competed against. He stepped closer to Thunderbolt, who regarded him curiously. May I? James nodded, and Ray ran an experienced hand along Thunderbolt's flank, then checked his legs with practiced movements. Strong build, good muscle tone, but he's never raced before, has he? Not professionally, James admitted. We've been training, but... Listen, Ray interrupted, lowering his voice. Registration is in that building. Get him entered, then meet me at Barn C in 20 minutes. I might be able to help. Before James could ask any questions, Ray was already walking away. Emma raised an eyebrow. What was that about? I'm not sure, James replied. But right now, I'll take any help we can get. After registering Thunderbolt and receiving their qualifier number 37, they made their way to Barn C. Ray was waiting, now accompanied by a young woman holding a sleek black racing saddle. This is my granddaughter, Sophia, Ray introduced. She's a jockey on the professional circuit when she's not helping her old grandpa with his modest racing operation. Nice to meet you, Sophia said with a quick smile. Grandpa told me about your situation. That's quite a horse you've got. Ray nodded toward the saddle in Sophia's hands. Racing saddle, properly fitted and balanced, makes a world of difference on the track. You can borrow it for today. James stared at the offered equipment, then back at Ray. Why would you help us? We're competing against you. Ray's weathered face creased into a smile. My horse is a sure qualifier. Been racing for 3 years now. But more than that, your father helped me once, years ago, when my trailer broke down 50 miles from an important race. Never forgot it. He shrugged. Besides, it's qualifying. Real competition comes in 3 weeks. Grateful for the unexpected alliance, James accepted the saddle. Sophia offered additional advice on how Thunderbolt should approach the starting gate. Apparently the most challenging part for horses new to racing. The noise, the confinement, the tension, it can rattle even experienced racers, she explained. Talk to him constantly. Keep your hands steady on the reins. And the moment those gates open, give him a clear signal. He needs to know exactly what you want. As the qualifying heats approached, James led Thunderbolt to the warm-up area. The horse's ears swiveled continuously, taking in the unfamiliar sounds and sights. Professional jockeys in colorful silks guided their mounts in precise patterns while trainers called out instructions. Number 37, you're in Heat 5, a track official informed them, eyeing Thunderbolt with obvious skepticism. Track will be open for your warm-up in 15 minutes. James nodded, trying to project a confidence he didn't entirely feel. He stroked Thunderbolt's neck soothingly. Just like we practiced at home, boy. Nothing to it. The warm-up period passed too quickly. Soon James was leading Thunderbolt toward the starting gate for Heat 5. They were assigned to Gate 3, with professional racers on either side. The jockey to his right, a thin man with hard eyes, gave James a dismissive glance. First time on a real track, old-timer? He asked with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. James ignored him, focusing instead on keeping Thunderbolt calm as they approached the gate. The horse's muscles tensed beneath him, sensing his rider's anxiety despite James's attempts to conceal it. Easy, boy, James murmured, patting Thunderbolt's neck. Just like home. As they entered the gate, Thunderbolt balked momentarily, the confined space clearly making him nervous. James leaned forward, speaking directly into the horse's ear, using the same soothing tone that had calmed him through thunderstorms and veterinary visits. You can do this, he whispered. I believe in you. The gates closed behind them. Thunderbolt shifted anxiously, but James kept his hands steady on the reins, just as Sophia had advised. Around them, other horses stamped and snorted, their jockeys poised like coiled springs. The seconds stretched into eternity. James could hear his own heartbeat, feel Thunderbolt's powerful muscles bunched beneath him, ready to explode into motion. Then, the bell rang, and the gates flew open. For one heart-stopping moment, Thunderbolt hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden noise and movement. The other horses surged forward, leaving them momentarily behind. James felt a flash of panic. Then he gave the signal they'd practiced, a firm pressure with his knees and a quick command. Thunderbolt responded instantly, lunging forward with such sudden acceleration that James nearly lost his balance. They burst from the gate, already several lengths behind the leaders but rapidly gaining momentum. The track stretched before them, a ribbon of dirt around which the other horses were already flying. James leaned low over Thunderbolt's neck, feeling the powerful rhythm of the horse's stride. This was different from their practice runs. Faster, more urgent, the hoofbeats of the competition driving Thunderbolt to push harder. By the first turn, they had moved from last place to fifth. Thunderbolt took the curve smoothly, responding to James's subtle guidance. As they straightened into the back stretch, James could see they were gaining on the fourth-place horse. "That's it, boy," he encouraged, though his words were whipped away by the wind. "Just like that." Thunderbolt seemed to understand, lengthening his stride even further. They overtook the fourth-place horse, then the third. As they approached the final turn, only 2 horses remained ahead of them. James could feel Thunderbolt's power, the controlled explosion of muscle and will beneath him. But he could also sense that the horse was tiring, unused to this level of sustained speed. The leaders were experienced racers, their stamina carefully conditioned over years of training. The final stretch loomed ahead. James made a split-second decision. Rather than pushing Thunderbolt to catch the leaders, potentially exhausting him completely, he maintained their pace, focusing on a clean, strong finish. They crossed the line in third place, behind 2 professional racers, but well ahead of the rest of the field. As James slowed Thunderbolt to a walk, patting his neck and murmuring praise, he caught sight of Emma at the rail, jumping up and down with excitement. Nearby stood Ray and Sophia, both nodding with approval. The time flashed on the board, fast enough for a comfortable qualification. The jockey who had mocked him earlier trotted past, his expression now one of grudging respect. "Not bad for a farm horse," he conceded. James couldn't suppress his grin as he guided Thunderbolt back toward the holding area. The horse was breathing hard but held his head high, seeming to understand that he had accomplished something significant. As they dismounted, Emma rushed over, throwing her arms around her father's neck. "You did it. You qualified." "We qualified," James corrected, turning to include Thunderbolt in her embrace. "Couldn't have done it without this guy." "Or without some good advice," Ray added, approaching with Sophia. "That was impressive, Morgan. He's got natural talent, and so do you. Seems you inherited more from your father than just his stubbornness." James laughed, the tension of the day finally releasing. "Thank you both. The saddle made a real difference." "Keep it for the Derby," Sophia offered. "You've earned it. Besides, I want to see what you 2 can do with 3 more weeks of training." As they celebrated this first victory, James noticed a familiar figure standing at the edge of the spectator area. Blake Donovan was watching them, his expression unreadable. When he saw James looking his way, he gave a small, almost respectful nod before turning and walking toward the parking lot. "What do you think that was about?" Emma asked, having followed her father's gaze. James shook his head. "I'm not sure, but I don't think we've seen the last of him." For now, though, they had achieved what they came for. Thunderbolt had qualified for the Derby, proving himself against professional competition. It was just the first step in a longer journey. But as James looked at his horse, tired but proud, just like himself, he felt the first real stirring of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance after all. The news of Thunderbolt's qualification spread through the community like wildfire. By the time James and Emma returned home with their trailer, 3 neighbors were already waiting at the farm gates, eager to hear a first-hand account of the unlikely triumph. Within days, what had begun as one man's desperate attempt to save his farm had transformed into a communal mission. "Never thought I'd see another racing Morgan," old Tom Wilson declared, setting down a bag of premium oats he'd brought over. "Your father would be proud, James." James nodded his thanks, still processing the events of the qualifying round. Thunderbolt had surprised everyone, himself included, with his performance, but the Derby would be another matter entirely. They'd be up against the top 12 qualifiers, all seasoned racers with professional training and substantial financial backing. "We've still got a long way to go," he reminded everyone who congratulated him. Qualifying was just the first step. The real work began the next morning. Using the advice Ray and Sophia had given them, James altered their training regimen to focus on Thunderbolt's starts and his endurance in the final stretch. the two areas where they'd shown the most room for improvement during qualifying. Emma threw herself into the effort with newfound enthusiasm, researching racing diets and recovery techniques online. She'd even set up a makeshift bulletin board in the kitchen where she'd pinned articles, training schedules, and notes from their practice runs. "The Derby is a half-mile longer than the qualifier," she informed James over breakfast one morning, a week after the qualifying race. "Thunderbolt needs to conserve energy early if he's going to have anything left for the finish." James nodded, impressed by his daughter's sudden expertise. "We'll work on pacing today." Their routine quickly settled into a rhythm: mornings for speed work, afternoons for strength and endurance training, and evenings for gentle cool-downs and recovery. Thunderbolt responded to the intensified schedule with remarkable enthusiasm, seeming to understand the purpose behind each exercise. 10 days after qualifying, Ray Simmons and Sophia made the hour-long drive to the Morgan farm to check on their progress. "His form is improving," Sophia observed, as Thunderbolt completed a practice run around the makeshift track James had created in the back pasture. She checked the stopwatch in her hand. "And his times are getting more consistent. That's crucial for race day." Ray walked the length of their homemade track, occasionally kneeling to check the soil. "Ground's a bit soft here," he noted. "You might want to work him on firmer terrain occasionally. The Derby track will be packed hard." They spent the afternoon sharing techniques and strategies, with Sophia demonstrating subtle shifts in positioning that could help both James and Thunderbolt conserve energy during the race. As they prepared to leave, Ray pulled James aside. "Donovan's been asking questions about your horse," he said quietly. "At the track, in town, he's not being subtle about it." James frowned. "What kind of questions? Medical history, training background? Someone even said he tried to get a look at the qualifier results from the race officials." Ray gave him a significant look. "He's not just a casual buyer, James. Something else is driving his interest." The warning stayed with James long after Ray and Sophia had gone. Blake Donovan's persistence was unsettling. What could the wealthy businessman want with Thunderbolt that justified such determination? The answer arrived 3 days later, in the form of a glossy brochure left in their mailbox. "Sunrise Valley Estates," the cover announced in elegant script, "luxury living in harmony with nature." Inside were artist renderings of an upscale development, sprawling homes on manicured lots, a country club, and at the centerpiece of it all, an equestrian center featuring a familiar chestnut stallion. "That's Thunderbolt," Emma gasped, looking over her father's shoulder at the brochure. "They've put him in their marketing materials." James stared at the image, anger building like a slow-burning fire. The artist had captured Thunderbolt's distinctive markings and proud carriage perfectly. There was no mistaking his horse. On the back page, Blake Donovan's name appeared as the development's founding partner. "It's all been a marketing ploy," James muttered, tossing the brochure onto the kitchen table. "He wants Thunderbolt as the living mascot for his luxury development. Probably plans to build the whole thing right here, on farmland he's buying up while families go under." The revelation clarified everything. Donovan's repeated offers, his interest in their financial situation, the questions he'd been asking around town. The man wasn't a horse enthusiast. He was a developer who had found the perfect symbol for his new playground for the wealthy. "We should talk to a lawyer," Emma suggested. "Using Thunderbolt's image without permission." "We don't have money for lawyers," James cut in, his voice tight. "We barely have enough to keep training for the Derby." He picked up the brochure again, studying the development plans more closely. "This land here where they've drawn in the main entrance, that's the Peterson place. And this area for the golf course includes Tom Wilson's property." Emma leaned in for a better look. "Has he approached them too?" "If he hasn't yet, he will soon." James folded the brochure and tucked it into his pocket. "I need to warn them." That evening, James called an impromptu meeting at the farm. The Petersons, Tom Wilson, and several other neighboring farmers gathered in his living room, passing the brochure around with expressions ranging from shock to outrage. "He offered us market value last month," Frank Peterson confirmed. his weathered face creased with concern. Didn't mention any development plans, just said he was consolidating agricultural interests in the area. Same speech he gave me, added Sarah Jenkins, who owned 50 acres adjoining the Morgan farm. Said he was looking to expand sustainable farming practices. I almost believed him until he mentioned the tight timeline for decision-making. Tom Wilson snorted derisively. Sustainable, my foot. He's looking to pave over generations of farmland to build McMansions for city folk. The discussion continued well into the night, with each neighbor sharing similar stories of Donovan's approaches. By the time they dispersed, a new sense of solidarity had formed among the group. This wasn't just about James and Thunderbolt anymore. It was about preserving a way of life. "We're with you, James," Frank Peterson said as he left, gripping James's shoulder firmly. "Win that derby. Show Donovan that our community isn't for sale." The following morning, James woke before dawn with renewed determination. The stakes had risen beyond his personal struggle. He was now racing for the entire community. As he stepped out to begin Thunderbolt's morning training, he was surprised to find Emma already in the barn, grooming the stallion with meticulous care. "I set the timer on the coffee pot," she said without looking up from her task. "Thought we could get an early start today." James watched his daughter for a moment, struck by how much she resembled her mother in her quiet determination. "Thank you," he said simply. They worked through their training routine with focused intensity, pushing a little harder than usual. Thunderbolt seemed to sense the shift in energy, responding with equal commitment. Later that afternoon, as James was checking Thunderbolt's legs after a cool-down walk, the sound of an approaching vehicle caught his attention. Looking up, he felt a jolt of apprehension at the sight of the now familiar black SUV coming up the driveway. "Dad!" Emma called from the barn doorway. "It's him." James straightened up, brushing dust from his jeans. "Stay with Thunderbolt," he instructed, heading toward the house to intercept their unwelcome visitor. Blake Donovan emerged from his vehicle wearing the same polished smile as during his first visit, though there was a new edge to it now, the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. "Mr. Morgan," he greeted, extending his hand. "I trust you received our community information package?" James ignored the offered hand. "You mean the brochure showing my horse as the mascot for your development? The one you created without my permission?" Donovan's smile didn't waver. "An artist's rendering only, I assure you, though I'd still prefer the real thing." He glanced toward the barn where Thunderbolt was visible in the doorway, Emma at his side. "I understand you qualified for the Willow Creek Derby. Congratulations. That's quite an achievement for an amateur." The slight emphasis on the final word wasn't lost on James. "What do you want, Donovan?" "The same thing I've wanted from the beginning." Donovan reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "Though in light of your horse's recent performance, I've reassessed his value. My final offer, $50,000. James's breath caught. The amount was more than double what he needed to save the farm, enough to clear the debt, make substantial improvements, and still have a cushion for future emergencies. Donovan seemed to read his thoughts. "The Derby is still 2 weeks away, Mr. Morgan. That's 2 weeks of potential injuries, training setbacks, or simply being outclassed by superior horses. Why risk everything on such uncertain odds when you could walk away today with your financial troubles solved?" For a moment, just a moment, James wavered. $50,000 was life-changing money for someone in his position. Then his gaze drifted to the barn, where Thunderbolt stood watching them, his intelligent eyes somehow understanding that his fate hung in the balance. Beyond him, the farmland stretched out, land that had been in the Morgan family for generations, land that Donovan wanted to transform into a playground for the wealthy. "No," James said firmly. "Not for any price." Donovan's pleasant facade finally cracked, revealing a flash of genuine frustration. "You're making a mistake, Morgan. This development is happening whether you cooperate or not. The only question is whether you'll benefit from it or be crushed beneath it." "We'll see about that," James replied evenly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a horse to train. As Donovan drove away, Emma joined her father, watching the dust cloud left by the SUV's departure. $50,000, she murmured. That's a lot to turn down. James nodded, his eyes still on the horizon. It is. But some things really don't have a price tag, Emma. I'm starting to think this whole community might be one of them. The morning after James rejected Donovan's $50,000 offer, he found a small crowd gathered at his front gate. For a moment, he feared Donovan had returned with reinforcements, but as he approached, he recognized familiar faces: the Petersons, Tom Wilson, the Jenkins family, and at least a dozen other neighbors from surrounding farms. "What's all this?" James asked, pushing open the gate. Frank Peterson stepped forward, hat in hand. "We heard about Donovan's visit yesterday. Word travels fast." He glanced back at the assembled group. "We wanted you to know that we're standing with you, James. All of us. And we want to help," Sarah Jenkins added, "with Thunderbolt's training." James looked at the gathering with bewilderment. "I appreciate that, but what can you all do?" Tom Wilson chuckled. "More than you might think. Peterson's boy was a stable hand at Belmont for 2 summers. Jenkins here used to breed quarter horses before she switched to cattle. And my nephew just finished veterinary school with a specialty in equine sports medicine." Over the next hour, the neighbors outlined a community-wide effort to support Thunderbolt's Derby preparation. The Peterson boys would help maintain James's training track, keeping it in optimal condition. Sarah Jenkins offered the use of her horse walker for cross-training. Tom's nephew, Dr. Wilson, volunteered to monitor Thunderbolt's physical condition throughout the training period. "We've even set up a schedule," Frank explained, producing a handwritten chart. "None of us can be here full-time, but between all of us, you'll have help every day until the Derby." Overwhelmed by the show of support, James could only nod his gratitude. Emma, standing beside him, discreetly wiped away a tear. "There's something else," Sarah said, nudging her teenage daughter forward. The girl, Amy, clutched a small cardboard box in her hands. "We made these last night," Amy said shyly, opening the box to reveal several dozen pins and small ribbons in blue and white, Thunderbolt's colors, as chosen by Emma for the qualifier. "We're selling them in town to raise money for extra supplies and feed. People are already wearing them." James picked up one of the pins, a simple design featuring a silhouette of a running horse with Morgan Strong printed beneath it. "The whole town's talking about you and Thunderbolt," Frank added. "You're not just racing for your farm anymore, James. You're racing for all of us." With the community's help, Thunderbolt's training intensified. The professional input from experienced horse people revealed gaps in their preparation that James hadn't recognized. Dr. Wilson suggested adjustments to Thunderbolt's diet to build more lean muscle. Sarah's expertise in quarter horse racing provided insights into explosion from the starting gate. 10 days before the Derby, Ray and Sophia returned for another visit, bringing unexpected news from the racing circuit. "Donovan's entered a horse in the Derby," Ray informed James as they watched Thunderbolt complete a training run. "A Kentucky-bred thoroughbred named Emperor's Crown, 3-year racing veteran with an impressive record." James frowned. "I didn't see him at the qualifiers." "He wasn't there," Sophia confirmed. "Donovan bought him last week from a stable in Kentucky. Paid a fortune, from what I hear. The Derby committee allowed a late entry based on the horse's racing credentials." "Is that even legal?" Emma asked. Ray shrugged. "It's a charity Derby. The rules are more flexible than sanctioned races, and Donovan made a substantial donation to the event's beneficiary." The news was unsettling. Emperor's Crown would undoubtedly be a formidable competitor, perhaps the strongest in the field. The timing of Donovan's purchase made his intentions clear. If he couldn't buy Thunderbolt, he would try to defeat him publicly. "Don't let it get in your head," Sophia advised, noting James's troubled expression. "Race your race. Thunderbolt has heart, and sometimes that counts for more than experience." Despite Sophia's encouragement, a new tension permeated their training sessions. James found himself pushing harder, demanding more from Thunderbolt, who responded with his characteristic willingness but showed signs of fatigue by the end of each day. A week before the Derby, disaster struck. James was running Thunderbolt through a practice start when the horse stumbled slightly coming out of the turn. Though he recovered quickly and completed the run, James noticed a subtle change in his gait, a barely perceptible unevenness that sent alarm bells ringing in his head. Dr. Wilson was called immediately. After a thorough examination, he delivered his assessment with a grave expression. "Minor strain to the left foreleg tendon," he explained, demonstrating the affected area. "Not serious, but it needs attention. If you push him now, you risk a tear that could end his racing days permanently." "And if we rest him?" James asked, heart sinking. "Complete rest for 3 days, then gentle walking for 2 more. After that, we'd need to reassess." Dr. Wilson's expression was sympathetic but firm. No hard running until at least the day before the Derby, and even then, only if he shows no signs of discomfort. 5 days of reduced training, 1 week before the most important race of their lives. James tried to keep his dismay from showing as he thanked the young veterinarian for his help. Once they were alone, Emma voiced what they were both thinking. "That's almost our entire remaining training time." "I know," James replied quietly, stroking Thunderbolt's neck. The horse seemed to sense his disappointment, nuzzling against his shoulder as if in apology. Word of Thunderbolt's injury spread quickly through their support network. The next morning, Sarah Jenkins arrived with specialized cold wraps for the affected tendon. Tom Wilson brought a portable therapeutic ultrasound device borrowed from a friend in the veterinary supply business. Throughout the day, neighbors stopped by with remedies, advice, and offers of help. Dr. Wilson visited daily, monitoring the injury's healing with professional care. By the 3rd day of rest, the strain showed significant improvement, but the doctor remained cautious. "He's responding well," he told James, "but tendons are tricky. Push too hard too soon and we're back to square one, or worse." Following the prescribed rehabilitation plan was agonizing for James. He watched other Derby contenders continue their training, while Thunderbolt was limited to walking exercises and gentle stretches. Each day that passed without proper training felt like ground lost, advantage given to their competitors, especially Donovan's imported champion. 4 days before the Derby, during Thunderbolt's carefully supervised walking session, Blake Donovan's black SUV appeared on the road bordering the Morgan property. He didn't approach, simply parked and watched for several minutes before driving away. The message was clear. He knew about the injury and was monitoring their progress, or lack thereof. "He's trying to intimidate us," Emma said that evening as they applied another cold wrap to Thunderbolt's leg. "Remind us that he has the advantage now." James nodded grimly. "And he does. Emperor's Crown is a professional racehorse in peak condition. We've lost critical training days. So what do we do?" James considered the question as he secured the wrap. "We adapt. If we can't work on speed, we'll focus on what we can improve. His mental preparation, his start response, my riding position." He looked up at Emma with renewed determination. "We'll use these days differently, not waste them." The following morning, James implemented a new approach. Instead of physical conditioning, he worked with Thunderbolt on gait starts using a makeshift structure built by the Peterson boys, focusing on the mental aspects of racing that didn't require speed work. They practiced different starting positions, refining the subtle communication between rider and horse in those crucial first moments. Dr. Wilson approved the modified training approach and, after careful examination, gave permission for light trotting 2 days before the Derby. "The strain has healed well," he confirmed, "but ease him back in gradually. No full-speed work until the day before the race, and even then, just enough to test his readiness." On the eve of the Derby, the Morgan farm hosted an impromptu community gathering. Dozens of neighbors arrived, many wearing the Morgan Strong pins that had become a symbol of resistance throughout the valley. They brought food, encouragement, and a tangible sense of solidarity. As twilight descended, Frank Peterson raised a toast. "To James and Thunderbolt," he called out, lifting his glass. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already shown us what it means to stand for something that matters." Later, after the guests had departed, James made a final visit to the barn. Thunderbolt greeted him with a soft nicker, his intelligent eyes somehow conveying understanding of the moment's importance. "Just you and me tomorrow, boy," James murmured, stroking the horse's forehead. "Everyone's counting on us, but when those gates open, it'll come down to what we can do together." Thunderbolt butted his head gently against James's chest in what felt like affirmation. The injury had cost them valuable training time, and Donovan's professional racer loomed as a formidable obstacle, but James felt a curious calm settling over him. Whatever the outcome, they would face it on their own terms. Derby Day dawned clear and crisp, with just enough chill in the morning air to energize both horses and riders. James woke before his alarm, his mind already racing through final preparations and race strategy. He found Emma in the kitchen, 2 cups of coffee prepared, staring silently at the calendar where she'd circled today's date nearly a month ago. "Big day," she said, sliding 1 mug toward him. James nodded, taking a sip. "How's our boy this morning?" "Already had a look. Dr. Wilson's checking him now, but he seems good. Alert, eating well. No signs of discomfort in the leg." They finished their coffee in companionable silence before heading to the barn. Dr. Wilson was just completing his examination when they arrived, his face revealing nothing as he methodically checked Thunderbolt's legs, particularly the recently injured tendon. "Well?" James asked when he could stand the suspense no longer. The young veterinarian straightened up with a cautious smile. "The tendon looks solid, no heat, no swelling." He patted Thunderbolt's neck. "I'd still be careful with the warm-up, no hard running until the race itself, but he should be okay to compete." The relief James felt must have shown on his face, because Dr. Wilson quickly added, "That said, you'll need to pay close attention during the race. If you feel any change in his gait, any hesitation at all, you pull him up immediately. No derby is worth permanent damage." "I understand," James promised. "His welfare comes first." Loading Thunderbolt into the borrowed trailer felt different this time, weighted with significance beyond their personal struggle. The Morgan Strong pins that had started as a small community gesture were now visible throughout the valley. Many of their neighbors had already headed to Willow Creek, determined to witness what had become a symbolic stand against Donovan's development plans. The drive to the fairgrounds passed in tense silence. Emma occasionally checked her phone, reporting messages of support from what seemed like everyone they knew. James focused on the road, mentally reviewing race strategy while trying to manage his growing anxiety. Unlike the qualifier, the Derby was a major event with substantial local media coverage. The parking area was packed when they arrived, and a festive atmosphere permeated the grounds. Colorful bunting decorated the grandstands, food vendors lined the walkways, and a brass band played near the entrance. Under different circumstances, James might have enjoyed the carnival-like environment, but today it only added to his sense of pressure. As they unloaded Thunderbolt, Ray appeared at their side, his expression unusually serious. "Emperor's Crown arrived an hour ago," he reported without preamble. "Donovan brought in a professional team, trainer, jockey, grooms, the works. They've got him in the premium stabling area." "Have you seen him?" James asked, securing Thunderbolt's lead rope. Ray nodded grimly. "Impressive animal. 16 hands, perfectly conditioned. His workout times are faster than anything else in the field." "Including us," James stated, rather than asked. "On paper, yes, but races aren't won on paper." Ray's weathered face broke into a determined smile. "Besides, you've got something he doesn't." "What's that?" "About half the county cheering for you." It wasn't an exaggeration. As they led Thunderbolt toward the preparation area, James was astonished by how many familiar faces appeared in the crowd. Farmers he'd known his entire life, shopkeepers from town, families who had lived in the valley for generations, all wearing the blue and white Morgan Strong pins, many calling out encouragement as they passed. Their assigned stall was in the general competitors area, a far cry from the premium facilities where Donovan had installed Emperor's Crown. Still, the Petersons had arrived early to prepare it, adding extra bedding and ensuring it was thoroughly cleaned. Thought Thunderbolt deserved the royal treatment today, Frank explained with a wink. The hours before the race passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Wilson performed one final check on the tendon, confirming it remained stable. Sophia stopped by to offer last-minute advice on the track conditions. Various neighbors appeared with well wishes, small tokens of luck, and words of encouragement. 90 minutes before post time, during Thunderbolt's carefully monitored warm-up, James caught his first glimpse of their primary competition. Emperor's Crown was indeed magnificent, a gleaming bay thoroughbred with a black mane and tail, moving with the fluid grace that came from impeccable breeding and professional training. His jockey, dressed in Donovan's chosen colors of black and gold, sat with the easy confidence of someone who had ridden hundreds of races. Standing nearby, clearly enjoying the attention his horse was attracting, was Blake Donovan himself. When he spotted James watching, he offered a small, knowing smile before turning away to speak with his trainer. "Don't let them get to you," Emma cautioned, noticing the exchange. "That's exactly what he wants." James nodded, returning his focus to Thunderbolt. "Let's finish our warm-up and get ready. Race time will be here before we know it." As the minutes ticked down, the Derby atmosphere intensified. The grandstands filled with spectators, the competing horses became increasingly spirited, and the announcer's voice boomed across the fairgrounds with growing frequency. James changed into his racing silks, blue and white, hastily created by a local seamstress who had volunteered her services, and Emma helped him secure the borrowed racing saddle. "Riders, to your mounts," came the announcement that sent a jolt of adrenaline through James's system. This was it. All the training, the sacrifices, the community support, everything had led to this moment. The outcome would determine not just his farm's fate, but potentially the future of the entire valley. Emma helped him into the saddle, then reached up to squeeze his hand. "Remember what Mom always said? Ride like the wind, but listen to the horse." James smiled at the memory. Sarah had been a gifted rider herself, always attuned to her mount's needs and capabilities. "I'll remember." The 12 Derby contenders made their way to the track for the pre-race parade. As each horse was announced, the crowd responded with polite applause. When number 7 Thunderbolt, owned and ridden by James Morgan, came over the loudspeaker, a roar went up from the community contingent. James felt a surge of emotion at the outpouring of support, straightening in the saddle and acknowledging the cheers with a wave. "And finally," the announcer continued, "number 12, Emperor's Crown, owned by Blake Donovan, ridden by Tony Martinez." Another wave of applause followed, though notably less enthusiastic from the local spectators. Donovan's horse pranced impressively, his jockey maintaining perfect control as they completed the parade lap. As they approached the starting gate, James focused on keeping Thunderbolt calm. The horse's ears flicked back and forth, taking in the unusual sounds and energy of the crowd, but he responded well to James's soothing words and steady hands. They had practiced gate starts extensively. Now it was time to put that training to the test. One by one, the horses entered their assigned positions. Thunderbolt was in gate 7, with Emperor's Crown at the far outside in position 12. James caught a glimpse of Martinez, Donovan's jockey, eyeing him with professional assessment. There was no mockery in his gaze now, just the focus of a competitor sizing up the field. The moments in the gate stretched endlessly. Thunderbolt shifted beneath him, tense but controlled. James kept one hand on his neck, murmuring reassurances while maintaining his race-ready position. Around them, other horses snorted and stamped, feeding off the collective anticipation. Then the bell rang, the gates flew open, and 12 horses burst forward as one. Thunderbolt's start was clean and powerful, exactly as they had practiced. They settled quickly into the middle of the pack as the field spread across the track, jockeys jostling for position heading into the first turn. James kept Thunderbolt on the inside rail, saving ground while maintaining a steady pace. Halfway through the first turn, he glanced back to locate Emperor's Crown. The professional racehorse had started smoothly and was already moving up through the field with methodical precision, his jockey guiding him with expert hands. As they straightened into the backstretch, James assessed their position. 5th place, with Emperor's Crown now 3rd and still advancing. The pace was faster than they'd trained for, but Thunderbolt seemed to be handling it well, his stride strong and even. Most importantly, there was no sign of distress from the previously injured leg. James made a split-second decision. Rather than pushing forward immediately, he maintained their position, conserving Thunderbolt's energy for the final push. It was a gamble, allowing Emperor's Crown to potentially open a significant lead, but with Thunderbolt's limited training and recent injury, it was their best chance. Approaching the far turn, Emperor's Crown made his move, surging past the 2nd-place horse and challenging for the lead. The crowd's roar intensified as the race's drama unfolded. James could feel Thunderbolt responding to the energy, eager to chase, but he held him steady, waiting for the perfect moment. They rounded the final turn, still in 5th position, but now James gave Thunderbolt the signal they'd practiced countless times. The horse responded instantly, lengthening his stride and accelerating with surprising power. They passed the 4th-place horse, then the 3rd, entering the home stretch with only Emperor's Crown and one other competitor ahead of them. The grandstand erupted as Thunderbolt continued to gain ground. James could see Emperor's Crown's jockey glance back, surprise evident even at a distance. Donovan's horse was still leading but no longer pulling away. 200 yards from the finish, they moved into 2nd place. The gap to Emperor's Crown was closing with each powerful stride. James leaned low over Thunderbolt's neck, feeling the horse's tremendous heart and will driving them forward. 100 yards. The distance between 1st and 2nd had shrunk to 2 lengths. Emperor's Crown's jockey was urging his mount on with increasing urgency, while Thunderbolt seemed to find another gear, fueled by determination that mirrored his rider's. 50 yards, 1 length separated them now. The crowd's noise became a wall of sound as the 2 horses thundered toward the finish line, Emperor's Crown holding a diminishing lead, Thunderbolt charging with everything he had. 25 yards, a half-length, neck and neck. At the wire, James couldn't tell who had won. The horses flashed across the finish line so close together that only the photo would tell. He eased Thunderbolt down gradually, patting his neck with trembling hands, whispering praise for the magnificent effort regardless of the outcome. As they circled back toward the grandstand, the announcement came over the loudspeaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a photo finish. Please stand by for the official results." Time seemed to stand still as the crowd waited for the official results. James dismounted, his legs unexpectedly weak as the adrenaline began to ebb. Emma had pushed her way to the track rail, her face a mixture of hope and anxiety. Around her, the Morgenstrong contingent stood in tense silence, many clutching each other's hands or shoulders. Across the track, Blake Donovan conferred with his jockey and trainer, occasionally glancing toward the officials' booth where the judges were reviewing the photo finish. His expression revealed nothing, but the tight set of his shoulders suggested he was far from certain of victory. "How's he doing?" Dr. Wilson asked, appearing at James's side to check Thunderbolt. James stroked the horse's neck, which was slick with sweat. He gave everything, not a hint of hesitation on the injured leg. The young veterinarian nodded as he quickly assessed Thunderbolt's condition. His breathing's already normalizing. That's a good sign. He bent to examine the previously injured tendon. "No heat or swelling that I can detect. We'll need to ice it soon, but I think he came through remarkably well." "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice suddenly boomed across the fairgrounds. "We have the official results of the Willow Creek Charity Derby." A hush fell over the crowd. After review of the photo finish, in 2nd place, Emperor's Crown. For a moment, James couldn't process the words. Then the implication hit him with the force of a physical blow. And the winner of the Willow Creek Charity Derby, Thunderbolt, owned and ridden by James Morgan. The grandstand erupted. Emma vaulted over the rail and ran toward them, tears streaming down her face. Behind her, the entire Morgenstrong contingent seemed to surge forward as one, cheering and embracing each other. "You did it! You actually did it!" Emma cried, throwing her arms around her father, before turning to shower Thunderbolt with affection. "You wonderful, incredible horse!" James stood in stunned silence, one hand still resting on Thunderbolt's neck. They had won. Against a professional racehorse. Despite the injury, the limited training, the overwhelming odds, they had actually won. As the reality sank in, James felt tears welling in his eyes. He pressed his forehead against Thunderbolt's, whispering words of gratitude that were lost in the surrounding celebration. The horse nickered softly in response, seeming to understand the magnitude of what they had accomplished together. Officials approached with a blanket of blue and white flowers to drape over Thunderbolt's withers. Photographers swarmed around them, cameras flashing. Someone placed a large trophy in James's hands, and a representative from the Derby Committee appeared with an oversized check for $25,000, the prize that would save their farm. In the midst of the commotion, James caught sight of Blake Donovan across the track. The businessman's face was tight with barely controlled anger as he watched the celebration. When their eyes met, Donovan gave a curt nod of acknowledgement before turning sharply and walking away, his racing team trailing behind him. The victory ceremony was a blur. James found himself guided to a small podium near the finish line, where he was expected to make a speech. Looking out at the sea of faces, neighbors who had supported them, strangers who had been moved by their story, Emma beaming with pride, he suddenly felt overwhelmed. "I'm not much for speeches," he began hesitantly, "but I want to thank everyone who believed in us. This wasn't just my victory. It belongs to our entire community." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Someone recently told me that everything has a price, but today proved that some things truly are priceless, like loyalty, determination, and the spirit of a community that refuses to be bought." The crowd roared its approval. As James stepped down from the podium, he was engulfed in a wave of well-wishers. Ray and Sophia congratulated him with fierce hugs. The Petersons, the Wilsons, the Jenkins family, and dozens of other neighbors took turns shaking his hand or patting his back. Several local reporters pushed forward with questions about the race and about the Morgan Strong movement that had captured local attention. Throughout it all, James kept glancing back at Thunderbolt, ensuring the horse wasn't overwhelmed by the excitement. Dr. Wilson had already begun cooling him down, applying ice packs to the previously injured leg as a precaution. Finally, as the initial frenzy began to subside, James made his way back to Thunderbolt's side. "How is he?" he asked Dr. Wilson anxiously. "Remarkably good," the young veterinarian replied with obvious relief. "No sign of re-injury. He'll need some careful monitoring over the next few days, but I think he came through even better than we hoped." By late afternoon, they had loaded an exhausted but triumphant Thunderbolt into the trailer for the journey home. The prize money had been officially transferred to James's account, with confirmation that it would clear in time to settle the bank's foreclosure notice. For the first time in months, James felt the crushing weight of financial pressure beginning to lift. Emma drove while James sat in uncharacteristic silence, processing the day's events. They were less than a mile from home when she finally spoke. "Dad, are you okay? You've been quiet since we left." James nodded slowly. "Just thinking about your mother. How much she would have loved to see today." Emma's eyes glistened. "She did see it, Dad. I'm sure of that." As they turned into their driveway, both gasped in surprise. At least 30 cars and trucks were parked along the edge of their property, and a large banner reading, "Congratulations, James and Thunderbolt," had been strung between two ancient oak trees. "What in the world?" James murmured. The moment they pulled up to the barn, people emerged from all directions. Neighbors, friends, and even a few strangers wearing Morgan Strong pins. Someone had set up tables with food and drinks. A local band was playing on the back of a flatbed truck. Children ran around with blue and white streamers. "Surprise!" Frank Peterson called out, approaching the trailer. "Hope you don't mind, but we thought a proper celebration was in order." James shook his head in amazement. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Frank replied. "Just enjoy it. The whole valley wants to celebrate what you two accomplished today." As they unloaded Thunderbolt, who perked up noticeably at the familiar surroundings despite his fatigue. Dr. Wilson appeared to supervise his post-race care. Several volunteers had prepared a special stall with fresh bedding and a carefully measured portion of feed. "We'll make sure he gets the royal treatment," Sarah Jenkins assured James. "You go and enjoy the party. You've earned it." The impromptu celebration continued well into the evening. James found himself repeatedly recounting the race to eager listeners, each time emphasizing Thunderbolt's heart and determination over his own riding skills. Emma moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations with a quiet grace that reminded James powerfully of her mother. As sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, James slipped away from the festivities to check on Thunderbolt. The horse was resting comfortably, showing no signs of distress from his exertion. James stroked his muzzle gently, still scarcely believing what they had accomplished together. "We did it, boy," he whispered. "The farm is safe. For now," said a voice behind him. James turned to find Blake Donovan standing in the barn doorway, his expensive suit looking oddly out of place amid the hay and dust. "Congratulations on your victory, Mr. Morgan," Donovan said, his tone carefully neutral. "It was, unexpected." "What are you doing here?" James asked warily. Donovan stepped further into the barn, his gaze shifting to Thunderbolt. "Paying my respects to the winner. That's a remarkable horse you have." "He's not for sale," James said automatically. "Not at any price." A thin smile crossed Donovan's face. "So you've made abundantly clear." He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "But I'm not here about the horse, Mr. Morgan. Not directly, anyway." James eyed the envelope suspiciously. "What's that?" "An offer. Not for Thunderbolt, but for a partnership." Donovan placed the envelope on a nearby shelf. "My development plans have encountered unexpected resistance thanks to your Morgan Strong movement, so I'm proposing an alternative." "I'm listening," James said cautiously. "Instead of Sunrise Valley Estates, I'm prepared to invest in an equestrian center and training facility, right here, using your farm as the cornerstone. Thunderbolt would be the flagship stallion for a breeding program that could revitalize the local economy while preserving the agricultural character of the valley." James stared at him in disbelief. "Why would you suddenly change your plans?" Donovan's expression hardened slightly. "I'm a businessman, Mr. Morgan. I recognize when a strategy needs adjustment. Your victory today has made you something of a local hero. Fighting you now would be counterproductive." He gestured to the envelope. "The details are all there. Take your time. Consider what it could mean for your community." Before James could respond, Donovan turned and walked out, leaving him alone with Thunderbolt and an envelope that potentially offered a very different future than the one he had imagined mere hours ago. Outside, the celebration continued, unaware of the new proposition that had just landed in James's hands. He tucked the envelope into his pocket, deciding to examine it later when he could think more clearly. Tonight was for celebrating their victory, not weighing new complications. Rejoining the party, James found Emma deep in conversation with Sophia about race strategy and training techniques. She looked happier than he had seen her in years, animated by the day's triumph and the community's response. "Everything okay?" she asked when she noticed him watching. James smiled, pushing thoughts of Donovan's offer aside for now. "Everything's perfect," he assured her. And in that moment, surrounded by friends and neighbors, with the farm secure and Thunderbolt safe in his stall, it truly was. Dawn broke over the Morgan farm, painting the land in soft golden light. James sat at the kitchen table, Donovan's unopened envelope before him, a cup of coffee cooling at his elbow. The house was quiet. The last revelers had departed well past midnight, leaving behind only empty plates and lingering goodwill. James had slept fitfully, his mind cycling between the elation of their Derby victory and uncertainty about Donovan's unexpected proposal. He'd checked on Thunderbolt twice during the night, finding the horse resting comfortably each time, showing remarkably little strain from his extraordinary effort. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced Emma's arrival, She padded into the kitchen in her pajamas, hair tousled from sleep, eyes brightening at the sight of the coffee pot. "Morning," she yawned, pouring herself a cup. "You're up early." James nodded toward the envelope. "Couldn't sleep. Donovan stopped by the barn last night." Emma's drowsiness vanished instantly. "What? Why didn't you tell me? You were having such a good time. I didn't want to spoil the celebration." James pushed the envelope across the table. "He left this. Says it's a proposal for a partnership, an equestrian center instead of luxury homes." Emma stared at the envelope as if it might contain something dangerous. "Have you looked at it?" "Not yet. Wanted us to do it together." They shared a long look, communicating wordlessly as they had learned to do after Sarah's death. Finally, Emma nodded. "Let's see what he's offering." James broke the seal and extracted several glossy pages bound together with a silver clip. The cover bore a new logo, Morgan Valley Equestrian Center, and an artistic rendering of their farmhouse, beautifully restored, overlooking modern stables and a training track. "He's using our name," Emma murmured, peering over her father's shoulder. James flipped through the pages, scanning bulleted points and financial projections. According to the proposal, Donovan would provide capital investment for renovations and new facilities, while the Morgans would contribute their land and expertise. Profits would be shared, with the Morgans retaining majority ownership of the property itself. Thunderbolt would head a breeding program focused on preserving and extending his exceptional bloodline. "This is not what I expected," James admitted, frowning at a section outlining community benefits, jobs, tourism, educational programs. Emma studied the financial projections. "These numbers are significant, Dad. If they're accurate, this could revitalize the entire valley's economy. That's if we can trust them. And him." James closed the proposal, conflicted. Why would Donovan suddenly change his approach completely? Just because we won a race? "Maybe he recognizes an opportunity when he sees one," Emma suggested. The Morgan Strong movement created genuine resistance to his development plans. This way, he still gets an investment opportunity, but with community support instead of opposition. James rose from the table and walked to the window, gazing out at the land that had been in his family for generations. The morning sun illuminated fields that had once flourished but had recently struggled under his stewardship. The Derby winnings would save the farm from foreclosure, but they wouldn't magically solve all the challenges of modern agriculture. "I need to check on Thunderbolt," he said finally. "We can talk more about this later." At the barn, James found Dr. Wilson already present, completing a follow-up examination of Thunderbolt's leg. "How is he?" James asked anxiously. The young veterinarian straightened with a smile. "Remarkably good. Some expected muscle soreness, but the tendon is holding well. No inflammation, good flexibility." He patted Thunderbolt's flank. "He's a tough one. Most horses would have shown more strain after a race like that, especially coming off an injury." James felt a surge of pride as he approached Thunderbolt, who nickered softly in greeting. "That's my boy. Never gives less than everything." As Dr. Wilson packed up his equipment, his expression grew curious. "Is it true what people are saying, that Donovan's proposing some kind of equestrian center now?" James blinked in surprise. "How did you hear about that already?" Dr. Wilson shrugged. "Small town. News travels fast." He hesitated. For what it's worth, as someone who specialized in equine sports medicine, a proper facility in this region would be invaluable. Currently, serious horse owners have to travel 3 counties over for comparable services. After the veterinarian left, James led Thunderbolt into the morning sunshine for a gentle walk. The horse moved easily, showing no signs of distress from his exertions. As they circled the barnyard, James found his thoughts returning to Donovan's proposal. The idea itself had merit, creating something that could benefit both the Morgans and the wider community, but he couldn't shake his distrust of the man behind it. By mid-morning, several neighbors had stopped by, ostensibly to check on Thunderbolt, but clearly curious about rumors of Donovan's new proposal. James answered their questions cautiously, emphasizing that he was still considering the idea and had made no decisions. Around noon, Tom Wilson's battered pickup rattled up the driveway. The older man emerged carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Martha sent over some lunch," he announced, holding up the basket. "Says you two earned a proper meal after yesterday." James accepted the basket gratefully. "That's thoughtful of her. Would you join us?" Over Martha's fried chicken and biscuits, conversation inevitably turned to Donovan's proposal, which Tom acknowledged having heard about from just about everyone in town. "What do you make of it?" James asked, valuing his old friend's perspective. Tom considered the question seriously. It's not a bad idea on its face. This valley has a strong equestrian tradition that's been fading as farms struggle. A center like that could bring it back, create jobs, give young people a reason to stay. He paused. But Donovan's no horseman. He's a developer who saw a roadblock and found a way around it. "That's what worries me," James admitted. "Can we trust him to honor the spirit of the agreement? Or is this just another way to get what he wants, our land, with less resistance?" "Have you talked to the Peterson boy?" Tom asked. "The one who worked at Belmont. He might have insights on the business side of equestrian centers. What makes them succeed or fail?" That afternoon, acting on Tom's suggestion, James and Emma drove to the Peterson farm. Alex Peterson, Frank's oldest son, had just returned from college with a degree in equine business management to complement his practical experience. The young man listened carefully as James outlined Donovan's proposal, occasionally asking for clarification on specific points. When James finished, Alex leaned back thoughtfully. "The concept is solid," he said. "There's definitely a market gap in this region for a comprehensive equestrian facility. And with Thunderbolt's reputation after the Derby, you've got a built-in marketing advantage." He tapped the proposal pages. "But these numbers seem optimistic, especially the timeline for profitability. And there's almost nothing here about the operational structure. Who makes day-to-day decisions? Who has final authority on breeding programs? That kind of thing." Emma frowned. "So you think it's not legitimate?" "I didn't say that," Alex clarified. "The framework could work, with the right safeguards. But you'd need a much more detailed agreement, with clear protections for your interests and Thunderbolt's welfare." He slid the proposal back to James. "If you want, I could help draft some conditions that would make this a more balanced partnership." As they drove home, Emma broke a thoughtful silence. "Alex made some good points. Maybe we should at least consider a counter-proposal with better protections." James nodded slowly. "Maybe, but something still doesn't feel right about Donovan's sudden change of heart." Upon returning home, they found Sarah Jenkins waiting at their kitchen table, having let herself in as neighbors often did in their community. Her expression was uncharacteristically serious. "I needed to talk to you privately," she explained, declining their offer of coffee, "about Donovan's equestrian center idea." James sighed. "Seems everyone knows about it now." "That's just it," Sarah said, leaning forward. "Donovan's already talking to other landowners. He approached Michael Foster this morning about contributing his north pasture to the project. Mentioned partnering with the Morgans as if it were already decided." James felt a surge of anger. "He's using our name to persuade others." Sarah nodded grimly. "And it's working. Michael's considering it. So are the Thompsons. Donovan's painting a picture of community-wide prosperity, with your Derby win, and Thunderbolt as the cornerstone." As Sarah departed, promising to keep them informed of further developments, James and Emma exchanged troubled looks. "He's trying to create momentum," Emma observed. "Make it harder for us to say no by getting everyone else on board first." James's jaw tightened. Typical developer tactic. Create a snowball effect, then claim it's too late to stop. That evening, as twilight settled over the farm, James sat on the porch steps, Donovan's proposal in his hands, wrestling with his decision. The Derby victory had saved their farm, but this new opportunity, problematic as it might be, could secure the future for many of their neighbors as well. The sound of hooves on gravel drew his attention. Emma was walking Thunderbolt up the driveway, the horse moving easily despite his recent exertions. Watching them, James was struck by how much his daughter had grown to love the animal that had initially represented only financial burden to her. "He wanted to see you," Emma called, a smile in her voice, kept looking toward the house. As if confirming her words, Thunderbolt nickered softly when he spotted James, quickening his pace. James stood, setting the proposal aside to greet the horse who had changed everything. As he stroked Thunderbolt's muzzle, feeling the velvety softness against his palm, a clarity began to form in his mind. Whatever they decided about Donovan's offer, it would be on their terms, terms that honored what Thunderbolt had given them and what the community had come to represent. The farm was safe. They had time now to make the right decision, not just the desperate one. 3 days after receiving Donovan's proposal, James called a community meeting at the town hall. Word had spread quickly, and by 7 o'clock the modest building was packed with farmers, shopkeepers, and families from throughout the valley, all eager to hear about the potential equestrian center that had become the primary topic of local conversation. James stood at the front of the room, uncomfortable in the spotlight but determined to address the rumors directly. Emma sat in the front row beside Ray Simmons, who had driven in specifically for the meeting. Sophia had come as well, her professional racing expertise lending weight to their deliberations. "Thank you all for coming," James began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I know there's been a lot of talk about Blake Donovan's proposal for an equestrian center on our land. I wanted to speak with you directly about it, since it affects not just my family but potentially our entire community." He outlined the basics of the proposal: the restoration of the Morgan farm as a centerpiece, the construction of modern facilities, the breeding program centered around Thunderbolt, and the projected economic benefits for the region. He also noted the concerns they'd identified, particularly regarding operational control and the accelerated timeline Donovan seemed to be pushing. "What I'm asking tonight," James continued, "is for your honest thoughts. This isn't just my decision. The Morgan Strong movement showed that we're stronger together, and I want to honor that." Frank Peterson was the first to rise. "James, we all appreciate you bringing this to us, but I've got to ask, do you trust Donovan, after everything he tried to do?" The question hung in the air, capturing the central tension that had been gnawing at James since receiving the proposal. "I don't," James admitted after a pause. "But I also can't deny that the concept itself has merit. The question is whether we can create enough safeguards to make it work, regardless of who's providing the capital." Alex Peterson spoke next, sharing his professional assessment of the business model. "The numbers could work, with adjustments to the timeline and scale," he concluded. "But the devil's in the details, particularly regarding decision-making authority." Dr. Wilson offered his perspective on the potential benefits for local horse owners, while Sarah Jenkins expressed concern about Donovan's aggressive recruitment of other landowners. Throughout the discussion, James noticed a division forming in the room. Younger community members generally favored exploring the proposal, seeing opportunities for jobs and revitalization. Older residents, who remembered other developers' broken promises, remained deeply skeptical. "We need to remember why we fought against Sunrise Valley Estates in the first place," Tom Wilson reminded the group. "It wasn't just about saving individual farms, it was about preserving our way of life. Does this equestrian center do that, or is it just luxury development in a different package?" The meeting continued for nearly 2 hours, with passionate arguments from both sides. James listened carefully, noting concerns and suggestions, watching the community wrestle with the same questions that had kept him awake at night. As the meeting was winding down, the door at the back of the hall opened, and Blake Donovan himself walked in, accompanied by a young woman carrying a leather portfolio. A hush fell over the room. James stiffened, unprepared for this direct confrontation. "My apologies for the interruption," Donovan said smoothly, making his way to the front. "I was in town finalizing some details and heard about your meeting. I thought perhaps I could answer questions directly." James exchanged a quick glance with Emma, who shrugged slightly. Neither had invited him. "Mr. Donovan," James acknowledged coolly, "we were just discussing your proposal." "So I gathered." Donovan turned to address the room at large. "I understand your skepticism. My initial plans for Sunrise Valley Estates didn't align with your community's values. That much became clear. But this new vision is different. He gestured to the woman beside him. This is Melissa Chen, my chief architect. She's brought some additional renderings that might help illustrate what we're proposing. Melissa stepped forward, unfolding large architectural drawings on a nearby table. Community members rose from their seats to get a better look at the detailed plans for stables, indoor and outdoor arenas, a veterinary facility, and educational spaces. The Morgan Valley Equestrian Center would preserve the agricultural character of the region while creating sustainable economic growth, Donovan continued as people examined the drawings. We're talking about 50 new jobs, educational programs for local schools, and a facility that could host regional competitions, bringing tourism dollars to local businesses. His presentation was polished and persuasive. James watched as many of the skeptical faces in the crowd began to soften, clearly impressed by the scope and detail of the plans. When Donovan finished speaking, Sarah Jenkins raised her hand. Mr. Donovan, you've been approaching landowners individually, suggesting the Morgans are already on board. Why the pressure tactics if this is such a community-minded project? A flicker of annoyance crossed Donovan's face, quickly replaced by an apologetic smile. A misunderstanding, I assure you. I've simply been gauging interest from multiple parties, contingent on the Morgans' participation. No commitments have been requested or made. James wasn't convinced, but before he could press the issue, Frank Peterson spoke up. These plans are impressive, but they're all centered on one horse, Thunderbolt. What happens to this entire project if something happens to him? He's valuable now after winning the Derby, but horses can get injured, sick. He left the implication hanging. It was a practical question, but it sent a chill through James. Donovan's response didn't help. Thunderbolt would be fully insured, of course, he said smoothly. And while he's the centerpiece of the initial breeding program, the center's long-term success wouldn't depend solely on him. The meeting continued with more questions, some pointed, others practical. Throughout it all, James observed Donovan carefully, noting how adeptly he navigated concerns and how skillfully he emphasized benefits while minimizing potential downsides. When the gathering finally dispersed, many lingered in small groups, continuing to debate the merits of the proposal. James found himself cornered by Donovan near the exit. You organized quite the town hall, Donovan remarked. Very democratic. These people have a stake in what happens to our valley, James replied. Their opinions matter to me. Donovan nodded thoughtfully. Admirable. But ultimately this decision comes down to you and your daughter. The rest is just consultation. There was something in his tone that raised James's hackles. We haven't made that decision yet. Of course. Donovan checked his watch. I'm staying at the Willow Creek Inn through Friday. Perhaps we could meet privately tomorrow to discuss specific concerns? He lowered his voice. There might be room to adjust certain terms, compensation, control structures, in ways that would specifically benefit the Morgan farm. The implication was clear. Special advantages for the Morgans in exchange for their support, separate from the community benefits. I'll think about it, James said neutrally, unwilling to commit. Donovan smiled thinly. Do that, but don't think too long. Opportunities like this have a limited shelf life. After Donovan departed, Emma joined her father, her expression troubled. He's trying to divide us from the community, she said quietly, offering private benefits to win our support. James nodded grimly. Classic tactic, divide and conquer. They drove home in contemplative silence, each processing the evening's events. The community remained divided, but James had detected a shift toward cautious support for the concept, if not complete trust in Donovan himself. At the farm, James made his customary late-night check on Thunderbolt. The horse seemed fully recovered from his Derby exertions, greeting James with his usual gentle nicker. What do you think of all this, boy? James murmured, stroking the horse's neck. Fancy new stables, professional trainers, a legacy of champions, he sighed. But at what cost? Thunderbolt nudged him gently, dark eyes somehow understanding. The next morning, James rose before dawn and drove to the Willow Creek Inn. The lobby was deserted at that early hour, save for a sleepy receptionist who informed him that Mr. Donovan had gone for an early breakfast meeting at the diner across the street. Through the diner's large front window, James spotted Donovan seated in a corner booth with a man he didn't recognize. Not wanting to interrupt, he took a seat at the counter where he could observe without being immediately noticed. The waitress poured him coffee with a warm smile. "Early bird today, Mr. Morgan. Thunderbolt letting you sleep these days?" James returned her smile. Something like that. As he sipped his coffee, snippets of conversation from Donovan's booth occasionally carried to him, not enough to follow the discussion, but sufficient to gather they were discussing property acquisitions. 20 minutes into his coffee, the conversation at Donovan's table grew heated. The other man, gray-haired, expensively dressed, seemed agitated, his voice rising just enough for James to catch a phrase. "Not what we agreed to." Donovan responded in hushed, urgent tones, gesturing with his hands in what appeared to be a placating manner. The older man shook his head repeatedly, clearly dissatisfied with whatever explanation Donovan was offering. Finally, the older man stood abruptly, gathered his papers, and strode toward the exit. As he passed James, their eyes met briefly. Something in the man's expression, frustration tinged with resignation, stirred James's curiosity. Acting on impulse, James left money for his coffee and followed the man outside. "Excuse me," he called, catching up to him in the parking lot. "I couldn't help overhearing. Are you having problems with Blake Donovan?" The man regarded him suspiciously. "Who's asking?" "James Morgan. Donovan's trying to build an equestrian center on my farm." Recognition flashed across the man's face. The Derby winner. He hesitated, then extended his hand. "Robert Hargrove. I represent a group of investors in Donovan's previous projects." "Previous projects?" James repeated. "Like what?" Hargrove glanced around as if ensuring they weren't overheard. "Like 3 other community-centered developments that started with big promises and ended with luxury condos and golf courses. The Morgan Valley Equestrian Center is just his newest pitch." He pulled a business card from his wallet. "Call me if you want details, but I'd be careful about signing anything he puts in front of you." As Hargrove drove away, James stared at the business card in his hand. The encounter had lasted less than a minute, but it had potentially changed everything. Section 10:10. By the time James returned to the farm, his mind was made up. He found Emma in the kitchen, reviewing the detailed notes she'd taken during the previous night's community meeting. "We need to talk," he said, placing Hargrove's business card on the table. "I just met one of Donovan's investors." Emma listened intently as James recounted the brief but revealing encounter in the diner parking lot. When he finished, she picked up the business card, examining it thoughtfully. "So the equestrian center is just another bait and switch? Get us to agree to something that sounds community-friendly, then gradually transform it into luxury development anyway?" James nodded grimly. "That's what Hargrove implied. I called him on the drive back. He's sending documentation on Donovan's previous projects, patterns of amended agreements, gradual scope changes, community promises that were technically fulfilled but practically abandoned." They spent the morning calling members of the informal Morgan Strong Committee they'd formed during the Derby preparations: Frank Peterson, Tom Wilson, Sarah Jenkins, and Dr. Wilson. By early afternoon, the group had gathered around the Morgan's kitchen table, examining the files Hargrove had emailed. Newspaper articles, modified contracts, and testimonials from community leaders in other regions who had experienced Donovan's development tactics firsthand. "Classic salami tactics," Frank muttered, reviewing a particularly damning case study. "Slice by slice, so small you hardly notice until it's all gone." "The question is, what do we do now?" Sarah asked. "Half the town is already excited about the jobs and economic boost the center would bring." James stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the pasture where Thunderbolt grazed peacefully. The horse had become a symbol of something larger than himself, a community's identity, its values, its determination to chart its own future. "We create our own plan," he said finally, turning back to face the group. Not Donovan's vision, ours. For the next several hours, they outlined an alternative. A more modest equestrian facility cooperatively owned by participating landowners, developed in phases as funding allowed, with ironclad protections against conversion to non-agricultural uses. Alex Peterson, with his equine business background, provided realistic projections. Dr. Wilson outlined necessary veterinary services. Emma sketched a potential organizational structure. This could work, Tom acknowledged, reviewing their rough plan. But where would the startup capital come from? We're not developers with millions to invest. James hesitated, then voiced the idea that had been forming since his conversation with Hargrove. Thunderbolt. Not selling him, but his potential as a breeding stallion. After the Derby, there's significant interest. We could use that as a foundation. The discussion continued well into the evening, refining concepts and identifying challenges. By the time the group dispersed, they had the framework of a viable alternative, smaller in scale than Donovan's grand vision, but authentic to the community's values and needs. "Do you think it's enough?" Emma asked as they cleared the kitchen table of notes and coffee cups. "Our plan versus Donovan's slick presentation?" "It has to be," James replied, "because the alternative is watching everything we fought for slip away, one small compromise at a time." The next morning, James called Donovan to arrange the private meeting he had suggested. They agreed to meet at the farm that afternoon, giving James time for one critical preparation. When Donovan's black SUV pulled up the driveway at precisely 2 o'clock, James was waiting on the porch. He noted with satisfaction that Donovan had come alone. No architects, no assistants, no visual aids. Just a man confident in his ability to close a deal. "Mr. Morgan," Donovan greeted him with a practiced smile. "I've been looking forward to our discussion." James nodded toward the barn. "Let's talk in there. I want to show you something first." Inside, Thunderbolt stood alert in his stall, ears pricked forward with interest at the visitors. Donovan approached, admiring the horse with what appeared to be genuine appreciation. "He really is magnificent," he said. "The cornerstone of what could be an exceptional breeding program." "That's what I wanted to discuss," James replied, leaning against the stall door. "Your vision for Thunderbolt's future. State-of-the-art facilities, professional training staff, carefully selected mares," Donovan began enthusiastically. "We could establish a bloodline that—" "I meant your real vision," James interrupted. "The one where the equestrian center gradually transforms into something more profitable. Luxury homes, perhaps? A golf course? The same pattern you've established in 3 other communities." Donovan's expression froze, then rearranged itself into careful neutrality. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." "I think you are." James held up his phone, displaying an email from Robert Hargrove. "Your investor was quite informative, as were the community leaders from your previous projects." A flash of genuine anger crossed Donovan's face. "Hargrove is a disgruntled minority investor who doesn't understand the realities of adaptive development." "Is that what you call it?" "Seems like a fancy term for breaking promises." Donovan's charm vanished completely. "The market determines the highest and best use of land, Mr. Morgan. I merely facilitate that process. And lie to communities along the way." "I create opportunities," Donovan countered sharply. "Yes, sometimes plans evolve. That's business. But the alternative for places like this valley is stagnation and eventual collapse." He gestured around the weathered barn. "You're holding on to a dying way of life." James smiled slightly, unmoved by the attack. "That's where you're wrong. Our way of life isn't dying. It's adapting on our terms." He pulled a folder from his back pocket and handed it to Donovan. "Our counter-proposal." Donovan skimmed the document with growing disbelief. "A cooperative, phased development, community oversight board." He shook his head dismissively. "This is amateur hour, Morgan. It would take years to implement, and the return on investment would be minimal. For developers looking for quick profits, yes, but for a community investing in its own future, the returns are measured differently." "You can't be serious." Donovan closed the folder with a snap. "This isn't a viable alternative. Actually, it is. We've already secured preliminary commitments from 12 landowners representing over 2,000 acres. The County Agricultural Preservation Board has expressed interest in providing matching grants, and 3 regional equestrian organizations have indicated willingness to relocate their events to our facility once the first phase is complete. This wasn't entirely true. They had interested parties but no firm commitments yet. But watching Donovan's confidence waver, James knew his bluff had hit its mark. "You're making a mistake," Donovan said, his voice hardening. "This valley needs outside investment to survive. What it needs is sustainable development that respects its character and values. We're prepared to pursue that with or without you." James met Donovan's gaze steadily. "But if you're interested in a genuine partnership, one with transparency and community control, we're open to discussion." Donovan stared at him for a long moment, calculation evident in his eyes. Finally, he handed the folder back to James. "I think we're done here," he said coldly. "Enjoy your cooperative fantasy, Mr. Morgan. When it fails, don't come looking for a better offer." James watched Donovan stride back to his SUV, his posture rigid with anger. As the vehicle disappeared down the driveway in a cloud of dust, Emma emerged from the house. "How did it go?" she asked anxiously. "About as expected," James replied. "He's not interested in our terms." "So that's it? He'll just abandon his plans for the valley?" James shook his head. "No. He'll try other approaches, maybe target more vulnerable properties. But we've drawn the line. Now we need to make our alternative work." Over the following months, the Morgan Valley Cooperative evolved from concept to reality. What began with a dozen committed landowners gradually expanded as momentum built. The first phase, upgrading the Morgan Farms facilities to accommodate Thunderbolt's breeding program, was completed with community labor and limited capital investment. True to James's prediction, Donovan didn't disappear entirely. He purchased a struggling dairy farm on the valley's outskirts and began developing a scaled-down version of his luxury homes concept. But with the cooperative firmly established and community sentiment solidly behind the agricultural preservation approach, his influence remained contained. 1 year after the Derby victory that had changed everything, James stood at the fence line watching Thunderbolt in the new training ring they'd built with cooperative funds. The horse moved with the same powerful grace that had carried him to victory, though he now spent more time with carefully selected mares than on the racetrack. "Penny for your thoughts," came Emma's voice as she joined him at the fence. James smiled, putting an arm around his daughter's shoulders. "Just thinking about how different things might have been if I'd accepted Donovan's first offer for Thunderbolt." $10,000 seemed like a lot of money back then, Emma acknowledged. "It was never about the money," James said softly. "It was about recognizing what truly matters." In the paddock beyond Thunderbolt, 3 young foals frolicked on gangly legs, the first generation of what was becoming known as the Thunderbolt line. Already, horse enthusiasts from across the region were expressing interest in the breeding program, drawn by the story of the unlikely Derby champion and the community that had rallied around him. "Mom would be proud," Emma said, resting her head against her father's shoulder. "Not just of saving the farm, but of what it's becoming." James nodded, watching as Thunderbolt raised his head to the breeze, nostrils flaring as if sensing the future on the wind. The farm had not merely been saved. It had been transformed into something that would sustain not just the Morgan family, but the entire community for generations to come. And it had all begun with a simple, unwavering conviction that some things truly are beyond price.